Community College District. And you may also know me as a writer of educational material, and I have proudly contributed 26 titles to the New Readers Press catalog, as well as other English language teaching material in Europe and Latin America. I really appreciate you joining me today for the subject of books that motivate adult students to read and develop fluency. I wish I could see all of your lovely faces. Unfortunately, a webinar only goes so far, but I would be curious. I would ask you if you were attending an in-person session about your instructional setting. I wonder if you have a smart classroom. Don't we all wish? Of course, now they're mostly virtual, but in a smart classroom, that you would have something containing multimedia components, interactive whiteboards, projectors, digital podium, things like that. I have to tell you, in my later years of teaching, I did have access to such a wonderful place, but for many, many years as an adult ESL instructor, I was known as a mobile unit, and I would be perhaps in a classroom or in an elementary school cafeteria off-site, where we would be serving, students in particular communities, a church kitchen. It was pretty rustic. You were carrying pretty much everything you needed to every class, and it was tough. Maybe you were lucky you had a cabinet or something you had access to. I imagine many of you today are in virtual classrooms, considering the precautions that we need to take right now for this pandemic. That some of you are interacting with students via Zoom calls and things like that. But I would like to know too, if your students come to class or their sessions equipped with their own books and materials, do you or your programs provide them? Are they digital? Are they in print? So these are all, interesting things that we're contending with. What you and your instructors are carrying to and from your classrooms would be interesting to me too. I'll give you my email later. I'd love you to reach out and answer some of those questions for me, as well as whether or not you're working with ESOL students or English native speakers. So something to think about. Classroom resources is, if you have that lovely cabinet tucked away somewhere, or you're providing things for students, I think in a very typical classroom, you're going to find grammar books. I love Betty Azar's Understanding and Using English Grammar. Is a really fabulous grammar book. Most of the publishers carry grammar books in one form or another, multi-level series. They're also, some instructors really like those and rely on those, and they can be very good. New Readers Press has some. I know for sure they carry Oxford's Step Forward, which is a really good one if you design your class around sort of a multi-level series or a program that supports that. Perhaps you have dictionaries. Used to be word dictionaries too, but then picture dictionaries came on the scene. I imagine those are in print and digital. Sometimes they are monolingual. Sometimes you can find lovely bilingual picture dictionaries that support the different language groups you may have. Perhaps audio materials, student newspapers are lovely. I really have absolutely nothing to do with News for You, but it is a fabulous resource. My school site has subscribed to it for decades. And finally, readers. I'm here to extol the virtue of readers. And let me tell you, I think readers sometimes can be underutilized in the ESL classroom, adult ESL classroom, because sometimes of the lack of resources that of a book, of a story that a student really, that you have access to or that students want to read. For many years I was involved in community-based English tutoring, and they really tried to sell the adults on kids' books. And while they were nice to be exposed to, and ideally they were going home and reading to their own children, they weren't so compelling for the people using them. So let's talk about reading, what reading does, especially if you have something that engages a student. Okay, so, without question, reading builds vocabulary. So it's an effective way to increase vocabulary, offering not only the exposure to new words, but an actual feeling for them. So students who discover new words in writing or through a story they're far more likely to incorporate them into their everyday lexicon. So reading also increases fluency. So there's a proven connection between reading and language development. So using readers will help students make noticeable strides in learning English, I promise. And if they have nice extension activities along with the reading, even better, because then you're also touching on other skills of reading, writing, listening, speaking. Teaching grammar, spelling, syntax. Well, it's an ideal way to focus on the rules of English as well as the correct spelling, the correct arrangement of words in a sentence. So you can look at lines and passages from readers to highlight parts of speech. You can focus on verb tenses and nouns, adjectives, adverbs, and creating new sentences. It's really a really nice starting point. Also providing pronunciation practice, reading aloud, having your students read aloud may be used to improve both pronunciation and intonation. So listening to students read will also help instructors to identify problems and target assistance. So, you're focusing on articulation, expression, stress, and rhythm of American English. Offering information, I really try to do that in all of my books, that there's some sort of learning in addition to the language that students may also benefit from. So I have a book that I'll show you a little bit later called Field of Vision, featuring a farm worker, a migrant farm worker who's been on the job for many, many years. And so the book will touch on information on a variety of medical problems that are unfortunately all too common in farm workers: cataracts, broken bones, head injuries from accidents with vehicles and machineries, infections from living in unsanitary conditions, spider bites or stings, snake bites, exposure to chemicals, sunstroke. It's one of the most dangerous jobs in the US. So in the book, there are references to some of those conditions, and also it discusses healthcare professionals and their role in caring for patients. One of the great things that reading does is spark conversation. So oftentimes in the classroom, we will have needs assessments. And what do you most want to get from class? And invariably, at least in adult education, most of them say they want to learn to speak better and have more confidence in speaking. But it can be really difficult sometimes to have conversations. How are you? Fine. How was your weekend? Okay. What did you do? Nothing. But you'd be surprised, in an engaging story, a reader will get, readers sometimes really get students talking, and they want to share their ideas about the unique situations in a book. They want to make predictions about what's maybe going to happen in a following chapter. And, a time that we can discuss the details in a story, like workplace settings or perhaps family dynamics and places where characters meet. So it's classroom conversations, really good ones, can be conducted from these stories, and they can occur as a whole class, they can occur in small groups, or perhaps in pairs. Don't discount entertainment, because, the 15 chapter novellas, in addition to they're designed to be comprehensible, educational, they are amusing, and they feature a diverse cast of relatable characters, and they, ideally are engaging students from the beginning to the end. And I think the students really enjoy the story. And finally, I think reading without question gives satisfaction. So, a story that succeeds in holding a student's attention it really does provide a sense of fulfillment when it's completed. So, you know, students who have a pleasurable reading experience are far more likely to continue the beneficial habit of reading and all of the wonderful things that spring from reading that you see above. I know this slide might be a little jarring, but I have to tell you, for years I observed students leaving my class, particularly when I was teaching at night, to go see their telenovelas. And I thought, okay, these are quite captivating and a guilty pleasure. I've watched some of them myself. They're a huge global export. I thought, you know, I had written a lot of stories for ESL that were kind of one-off stories or story collections. And I thought, okay, these weren't really designed to be sequential, but you know, maybe I need to start writing stories with a little bit of a cliffhanger, with the hopes of engaging my students successfully and increasing retention, which is actually, when you think about it, it's a big part of the ESL classroom. They have to be into it. They have to be excited by what they're learning, or they don't generally like to come. And I noticed that these stories were quite successful in accomplishing just that. The students really got into the book. So here are the 4 that came first: Novel Scenes series, and they are in order: City Dreams, and In a Tight Spot, Holding the Bag, and Room with a View. And City Dreams is considered to be the introductory level. So that's the lowest one we have, and about as low as you can get and still have some semblance of a storyline. In a Tight Spot is low beginning, Holding the Bag, high beginning, and Rooms with a View, low intermediate. And so that these 4 started there. And so more Novel Scenes came next a few years later, and started with the introductory level of A Special Delivery. Low beginning, Up a Tree, Dollars to Donuts would be the high beginning, and Field of Vision, the low intermediate. Now, I do completely understand that levels are relative terms, and it depends on your particular program and so on. And you know, this can vary from school sites, or depending on if you have more English for academic purposes, or if they are just, you know, students who are preparing more for the workplace. So that depends. So anyway, Novel Scenes and More Novel Scenes are 2 sets of 4 student books that provide stories and activities specifically designed for introductory, low beginning, high beginning, and low intermediate English language learners. And so the primary goal is to provide entertaining and relevant reading material that corresponds to key thematic units that are often studied by ESL students. Let's touch on those key themes. It was actually mandated in many of our classes that, you know, you really need to touch on people and family and workplace, particularly since so many of our students are preparing for the workplace or advancement in the workplace. Food, health, transportation, shopping, money, community, housing, communication, school, recreation, technology, and civics. I'm so sorry about that noise. Just a minute. Hey, Jim. I don't know why would you please forgive me? I don't know why my alarm, my house is not burning down. Thank you, but I don't know why it's decided to make that annoying sound just now. So I beg your pardon. So the topics in Novel Scenes and More Novel Scenes incorporate a wide variety of situations, motivating students to read and develop fluency. And the chapters in each book portray diverse characters in interesting, often familiar, and frequently exciting situations. Here we see Raphael. We're going to meet him later too, the farm worker. So let's talk a minute about the introductory level of Novel Scenes and More Novel Scenes. And we have, sorry about that. We have Joe and Gina. And Joe and Gina, Joe on the left has moved from a very small town to a big city. And Gina is a busy restaurant manager. I'd like to read to you just a little bit about, the tone of the book. So chapter 1, A Good Manager. This features Gina on the right. So Gina works in a restaurant. The restaurant is called La Roma. La Roma is an Italian restaurant. Many people eat at La Roma. Some people want food to go. A few people want their food delivered. Okay, so that's chapter 1. First paragraph of chapter 1, just so you get a little, a taste of how this sounds. The books increase in difficulty from, of course, with higher word count, more complicated sentences, and definitely the length. So here's Gina working in her restaurant. And she is, the theme in this particular story is personal responsibility. And her delivery driver calls in sick, and she's thinking, who do I have that can possibly take do the job instead? She kind of looks at herself in a mirror many, many times in this story, and she decides that it's her. She has to do the job herself. And she delivers a pizza to this young woman who's clearly in distress. Come to find out, her spouse is out of town, and she asks for a ride to the hospital, greatly pregnant, baby's coming a little bit early. And Gina decides, and looking at herself in the mirror, that it's time to take herself, that it's time for her to drive this woman to the hospital. And believe me, this is so controversial because people decide, oh, she shouldn't do that. That's really dangerous. She doesn't know this woman. There could be a medical emergency. And other students saying, well, of course, that's the right thing to do. She needs to get involved in this situation. Then we get into the low beginning titles, and we have In a Tight Spot featuring Minji, and we have Up a Tree featuring Jack. I just want to read you the first paragraph of the story featuring Jack. Jack, this is low beginning, so we're getting up a little bit. Jack owns a tree service. Happily, his business is doing well. He has 2 employees, Ben and Leo. Jack and his workers are very busy. Sometimes they trim trees. Sometimes they cut down trees. Their work is difficult and dangerous. Today, Jack, Ben, and Leo are working for Mrs. Alba, a woman in Jack's neighborhood. She has a big pine tree next to her house. The tree has heavy branches. Some of the branches are growing over her roof. If the branches fall, they will damage her home. So there's a little taste of Up a Tree. And then we see Minji and Jack, some lovely illustrations that support those books. To look at Minji, Minji is a 19-year-old who has a summer job in a dry cleaner. And there's quite an evil villain in this story called Carol. You can imagine who she is, just to the right of Minji. And she spies a customer's lovely dress and has an event to wear it to, which is very unethical, to say the least. So Minji discusses this plight with her family, and her father says, well, it's really not your business, stay out of it. And the mother, well, of course you need to inform your employer, and grandma is just delighted with the whole thing. Well, you can see that Carol does borrow the dress. It's not quite the right size. And the hilarity ensues when she actually wears it to an event, steps in a puddle, and the dress gets dirty and it's ruined. She decides to bring it back, drop it off at the dry cleaner, and it is left for poor Minji to sort of hold the bag in this situation. and she's implicated, and she nearly gets fired. Anyway, don't worry, justice will prevail, but she is quite distraught by this. And then we go to the high beginning level. There's two stories, and it's also nice to have a couple of novellas at different levels, because they will uh, reduce fatigue. When you're tired of one story, you have access to the other. So Holding the Bag and Dollars to Donuts, and they feature Nagasi on the left, Soraya on the right. And Nagasi is an Ethiopian taxi driver. Soraya is the MBA holding daughter of Cambodian immigrants who run quite a successful donut shop. But she decides to bring their shop into the 21st century and change it into a French bistro. That's a really fun story to read. I think your students will enjoy it. Nagasi, too, is a real favorite. He is a taxi driver living in Washington, D.C., supporting a wife, 2 children, baby on the way, and he has an extended family in Ethiopia. And he is, as you can see, the backdrop of Washington, D.C., where it has the highest Ethiopian population outside of Ethiopia. And you can hear you can see that you're following in this story his trials and tribulations, taking various customers here and there to a hospital, a possible emergency, or maybe the guy's just trying to rip them off. He has some tourists visiting the White House. This wasn't drawn yesterday, or you'd see the police surrounding the area. But in any case, it is kind of a nice story, and people certainly tip differently. Because of his financial problems, he fantasizes about the money that they print every day at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, and imagines, that would sure be nice to have a little bit of extra money. Later, this one's got some intrigue. There's a robber that comes and tells him to keep driving, and wouldn't you know that this robber leaves behind one of his bags of ill-gotten money, and he and his wife are counting it, not to keep, of course, but just out of curiosity. But there is a very, very strong temptation. You can see that he is thinking about skimming, maybe just a little off the top, to address their immediate needs. And but don't worry, he will go to the police. Goodness will prevail, and it makes quite an exciting story. And there's even a reward in it for him for doing the right thing. I wanted just to hear just the reading level for the reading level, excuse me, for the high beginning, which was the third one. And I'll just read you a little bit from the donut story. Soraya is standing inside Lucky Donuts. This morning the shop is busy. Her father Heng is deep frying dough in hot oil. Her mother Neri is pouring a cup of black coffee for Sam, a city bus driver. Then she puts a dozen donuts into a pink box for Lily, an office receptionist. Soraya counts 11 people sitting at tables, including Mrs. Ramos. Mrs. Ramos is at Lucky Donuts every morning. Clearly the place is very popular. So now we'll transition here to low intermediate, so you can just hear a little bit. On the left, you have rooms with a view. On the right, field of vision. These are nice past tense narratives. As this chapter 1 for Raphael on the right in field of vision. As the sun was going down, Raphael stood next to a field of strawberries. He heard a truck in the distance, but he couldn't see it clearly. Raphael had cataracts. That meant that the lenses in his eyes were cloudy. For Raphael, faraway images were blurry. He really needed surgery. Perhaps I'll have that operation next year, he thought, after I retire. for the moment, Raphael preferred not to think about it. And so these are the stories that in the low intermediate level, past tense narratives that feature Amelia and Raphael. So Amelia is a young woman from Mexico. She comes here with stars in her eyes, ready to live the excitement of the American dream, staying temporarily with her brother and his family. Well, she imagines in her mind's eyes that this is going to be a lovely little house by the ocean. After all, Southern California, this is a picture that many people formulate. But the reality is that the Desert Palms Apartments really is kind of like a desert, but without the palms. It's pretty rough, not what she imagined. And her career path is not exactly what she imagined either. It's very challenging and it's depressing as heck. This is a bit of an homage to the many, many, many hotel housekeepers I've had in my life, probably before the vast majority of them have become unemployed currently. But it's not a job for the faint-hearted. And she's worried about being stuck in a job like this as long as her coworker has for decades. And putting the triangle on the toilet tissue was not her idea of what it would mean to be successful in the workplace. And needless to say, some of the guests are really challenging and ask you to remake beds when they're annoying children, disrupt them, and work you've already done. There's some excitement in this story too. There's a dramatic rescue, but don't worry, all will be well. I want to take just a moment to tell you, a little bit about the actions that are illustrated. They give valuable context clues to support comprehension. And, illustrations, they create interest in the events in the story, and they provide starting points for discussion, help introduce new vocabulary. I mean, look at this picture. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people in it. Excuse me, all of them doing different things. And a great opportunity to cover this page with vocabulary words and nouns and verbs. So although the main purpose of these books is to help students develop reading skills, excuse me, they also include a comprehensive selection of follow-up activities. And in these follow-up activities, you're going to find reading comprehension questions, because after all, at the end of the day, you do want students to understand what they read, and you want to gauge whether or not they have understood it. There are vocabulary reinforcement exercises, there are dialogues, there are listening tasks, grammar exercises, critical thinking and problem solving, pronunciation practice, spelling practice, and self and partner assessment tasks. So between each chapter, there are 6 pages of exercises in these categories. And they are it's motivating to get through this work before you go on to the next chapter, and to just kind of support what they've already learned. So that's basically the format that you're going to see in these books. Also, you will find support in teachers' guides. They are online. If you look if you go to the New Readers Press website and you look under the supplemental reading, or you look at ESL and citizenship, and then supplemental reading, and then novel scenes and more novel scenes, you will find a comprehensive teaching guide. Some of you are very experienced teachers. This goes without saying. Some of you are very new to the field. You're volunteers, tutors at libraries and things, and you really haven't had a lot of experience with teaching language. I think you're going to find it very helpful. Let's say, for example, you're tackling a field division, the low intermediate novella featuring Raphael. And maybe you're going to talk a little bit about Raphael before you start reading the story. So there are preview suggestions. Introduce Raphael, the main character in the story, explain that he has cataracts, a clouding of his eyes, natural lenses, and that he can't see well. So the words that are italicized are words that you're going to see in the story, and you might like to explain them to students ahead of time. So go ahead and, please use that resource. It's free, it's online. Some good lesson notes to help for you to prepare for and carry out those lessons. Some instructors like to not even show a thing about the story, not discuss it, and they might introduce the book or a chapter in the book by having students make predictions. I'd like some of you to do that right now. For example, we're going to read a story about a person. Is this person a man or a woman? Is this person at work or at home? Is this person wearing boots or sandals? This person is looking at something in the distance. Is it a truck or an airplane? This person is waiting for someone. Is she or he waiting for a coworker or the doctor? So that's kind of fun. That gets students focused on, okay, I'm going to make these guesses. And then maybe you show the picture very, very quickly. And maybe you go back to the questions. And we're reading a story about a person. So based on what you saw very, very briefly, is this person a man or a woman? Probably noticed that it was a man. Is this person at work or at home? Looked like at work. Is this person wearing boots or sandals? Let's check, double check again. Oh, check again. Okay, those were boots after all. There was looking at something in the distance. Was it a truck or an airplane? Do you remember? Sometimes you might want to show the illustration again. Oh, definitely, it's truck in the distance. Now, you know what? Look at this lovely illustration. And these books are designed to be consumable. You cannot photocopy them for any more cheaply than you can buy them. Not that you would, and not that it isn't a bit of an unfortunate footprint of 8.5 by 11, because it is. But these are books to be owned in every sense of the word, and pages covered with students' notes and writing. In addition, we're not supposed to be sharing materials now too. So, in the past, we might have had 20 copies in a cabinet and students are sharing books. This is a time for, students to have their own books. So one thing I will do, just as a fun thing to take advantage of these lovely illustrations, is, let's talk about nouns in this picture. And, I'm going to give you 1 minute. And how many nouns can you find? I know you out there in webinar land, if I gave you a minute right now, I'd love to hear how many you came up with. So if you wouldn't mind, I'll give you a minute. And the person who has the highest number, you can communicate in a note to Dan, and I'll send you a book. Okay, ready? Here's 1 minute. Let's go. Nouns. Yes, think nouns. There are a lot. My record is 60 something. So take a minute. Write down your nouns. Yes, we have 37 seconds. More than meet the eye, I promise.
Someone, Ann, said that they can't see the whole text. And
no, the text is not what we're talking about. We're talking about just the picture.
Thank you. That's what I wanted you to say.
Yes. We're jumping off with just the picture. To create interest in the story, 10 seconds. I will be giving you and there we go. That's it. I'll be giving you my email address later if anybody is a top contender. I had a woman at one workshop that had 60 something words. So that's the number to beat, or whoever is the highest number. Same with verbs. Look at all the verb possibilities. To fly. Well, you know what? The birds are flying. Fly, what's the irregular past tense form of fly? Flew, past participle, flown. This is a great time to make verbs list. Watch, look, wear in terms of clothes, grow in terms of plants, drive. So you can make lists of verbs that also pertain to the story, but please make use of the illustrations. There's a secondary picture. These chapter 1 in my highest level, which is the low intermediate, there are 2 pictures and they're about a page and a half long, followed immediately by comprehension questions. Now, just a little word about the comprehension questions. I don't like in a language class to see students hunched over doing a lot of writing. I like to do them orally, and then maybe you can write them for homework, but not necessarily taking classroom time. In the higher levels, in the low intermediate and the high beginning, these would be information questions. In the lower levels, introductory and low beginning, these are yes, no, true, false type questions, immediately following the story so we can understand, make sure that we understand what we read. And then you're going to have some vocabulary reinforcement activities. And these might be organized in activities that have word boxes. And you might even number the word box with, number 1, is apartment. Well, how do you say apartment? Apartment, which one is the stressed syllable? The second one, how many syllables? 3. Contrary to many people think it's 4, it's only 3. And, which words in this box could be places to live? Well, perhaps, an apartment. It might be a tent. It might be a trailer. Raphael in the story remembers when people lived in cardboard boxes. So, which word means a female child, daughter? So, there are a lot of fun things you can do with these. And like I said, they're usually organized in terms of noun word boxes, verbs, adjectives, or prepositions. You might encounter a meanings exercise like the one below, and where you're looking for synonyms. As a respected foreman, he had definitely climbed the ladder in his workplace. Respected, does that mean exhausted or admired? Well, of course, the answer is B. And then many little idiomatic expressions like climb the ladder will creep in. Those are good words and expressions for students to know and to become more familiar with. You're finding dialogues. Yes.
This sounds like a good place to introduce this question from Richard.
Okay.
Wants to know, can these books be linked to specific vocabulary and grammar? Are there books that support your books, or how does that work with the vocab and grammar?
Well, you know what, for a grammar book for these, and again, we have so many different types of programs, but I would get a very low level grammar book, like the first level of understanding and using English grammar. That would be a lovely book to help support something like this. But it doesn't have, right off the top of my head, I'd have to think about that a little bit. It might be really useful for you to have some picture dictionaries in print form or digital form. That would be nice too. You think of something like this, even look at a picture where there's a body part. Look at the face on Raphael, and you could practice the eyebrows and the eyes and the nose and the mustache and the chin and the wrinkles on his face and so on. So I think that lovely support pieces to something like that would be a picture dictionary and a basic level 1 grammar book. So here's a dialogue. A dialogue. I feel terrible about your mother. Where were you? You're the boss, aren't you? Sorry, this dialogue refers to an accident in a bell pepper field where a woman passes out. Your mother and daughter were out there picking. Raphael apologizes. Sorry, my vision is weak. I didn't notice her. But it's your job to notice. I just couldn't see her from that distance. You're supposed to protect your workers. I told her and all of you many times to take water breaks and sit in the shade. Well, as a foreman, you need to pay more attention. If my mother dies, then it's your fault. So this is a very intense scene in the story. Students do generally enjoy role-playing activities, and I love to pair students and hear their pronunciation and their acting involved. And also I think whenever possible, it's really lovely to expand these dialogues, and they can get quite dramatic in class. So encourage your students to add, 6 more lines to this. What's going to happen next? What's she going to say? What's he going to say? You'll also find lots of checklists in stories in my novel scenes and more novel scenes. And these are fun activities to do, with students individually, but ideally in smaller groups where they get together and decide how to handle something. You have a health problem that is getting worse. Check the things that are good to do. Write other ideas on the lines below. We'll talk about it with family members for one. That is arguable for sure, because some people say, yes, of course, your family, that's who you go to for support. Where other students might say, oh no, I don't dare tell my aunt, she will spread the gossip to everyone, or, anyway, it's really fun to have controversy, to gather different opinions, and it doesn't matter so much what those opinions are, it's that students can defend their positions about certain things. I like this one too. Ignore people who give you advice. One student said, yes, because I outlived my doctor. That brought the house down. You meet a coworker in a hospital waiting area. This person is very worried about a relative. And this does reflect an event in the story. Check the things that are good to say. Is it your fault? That's probably not a very comforting thing to hear. Or do you feel guilty? Or I have a bad feeling, so anyway, there's a little bit of humor involved in some of these things. It's not good to say I have a bad feeling, because you want to support the person and help them feel positive. So these are lovely activities to do when you can, and to get those different opinions from your students and they enjoy them. Check the good reasons for people to go to human resources in the workplace. Write other ideas on the lines below. Most of these are pretty, they're legitimate reasons to go to human resources. Some of them are silly. Ask students, take this opportunity to ask your students if they've had any interaction with the human resources before themselves. You'll also find listening tasks. Listen to the sentences. In the back of each book, there are listening prompts. So it's a little script that you can have students read to each other. You might want to do the whole thing as a dictation. Some students are really into that and they enjoy that exercise. Pronunciation practice. Believe it or not, I'm sure some of you experienced teachers know that the ED endings on a regular verb can still be very challenging to pronounce. So these are the words that are the regular verbs that appear in the story. And check under suffered, sounds like a D, but rested, obviously if it ends with a T, the ED is pronounced as a separate syllable, or faced over here sounds like a T, and that can help students. Often there's a big difference in the pronunciation once they see, when they get the guidance to remember to make those particular sounds. And what about you is a little bit of assessment and extension. I sometimes want to leave my job. Okay, so, and then write a question for your partner. Do you sometimes want to leave your job? Okay, so Anna asks Ludmila and has to report back. Yes, Ludmila sometimes wants to leave her job. I'm asking, does Ludmila sometimes want to leave her job? Yes, she does, but I don't, or things like that. So that's actually, you get a lot of miles out of an exercise like this, because it's a writing exercise. You're reading the line, you're writing something on the line to ask your partner, you're asking your partner speaking, you're understanding what your partner says and reporting back. And finally, you'll find things at the end of the exercise portion of the novella's topics for discussion and writing. And some of them, in a multi-level class, sometimes we're very lucky and we have, 8 levels on a school site, at a school site, whether it's in person or now virtual. But you can also have just a big multi-level class. Like I've had many, many times where students may range from someone who has difficulty filling out their registration form to someone else who's lived here for 40 years and reads the New York Times, but just likes to go to school. And I like topics for discussion or writing because they can be really challenging activities, particularly for the latter type of student that might really be interested in developing writing. What are the appropriate steps to take when resigning from a job? Well, you might get something like 2 weeks notice, some student says or writes, and somebody else, well, one must consider this, an employee needs to consider this very carefully, and then they need to give their 2 weeks notice. And you're building into a paragraph of an answer with step by step what to do, or a 3-paragraph essay. So you can get a lot of miles out of something like this. If you think, this page is going to be done in 1 minute, you're not teaching it correctly. So also remember, in the teacher's guide, there are ways to expand all of the exercises too, ways to play with them a little bit. So you do get the miles out of it, and you're getting a lot from these books and these exercises, more than meets the eye initially. I do have a handout available. If you'd like to reach out to me with either how well you did finding nouns in a picture, or additional teaching tips that aren't online, please feel free to reach out to me at gianola@san.rr.com. I'd be happy to send you the Word document for additional teaching tips handout that could be applied to these readers or any good reader that your students enjoy. So just a quick recap here about the features of these stories. They motivate students to read and develop fluency, our main objective. They include comprehensive lessons that provide valuable practice in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. They're well organized and easy to use. They address life skills, and they touch on the key thematic units that we're supposed to touch on as English teachers. They're inexpensive and designed to be consumable. I want to stress that. We can't mandate that our students buy books, but a book that costs about $10 is something that most of them are willing to buy. Okay, so they make an excellent classroom supplement. So if you're doing grammar and you're doing vocabulary and you want a good reader, you can do that. And I've had instructors use them as core texts and throughout the semester. And they contain stories that are both informative and entertaining, and they will work well in a multi-level classroom. And so we have engaging stories that motivate students to keep reading. That's what we want. That's the objective. You put a book down, you pick up another one. We have the diverse characters and the interesting, suspenseful, intriguing, amusing situations, and the language practice material between each chapter. And remember, the teacher support is online, and it can be very, very helpful. If I've been kind of whizzing through some of this material today, you can read it at your convenience before you attempt to use this as a resource in your own meetings with students or your own classrooms. Another thing I have for 4 of them, I don't have them on everyone, but I have these lovely supplemental videos that I found on YouTube, nothing too long. But if you can send links to students for these videos to be discussed, between yourselves later. But for example, the Dollars to Donuts title about the Cambodian-run donut shop. I have some very short videos that make this story richer in terms of discussing the war in Southeast Asia, or how one Cambodian refugee started a donut empire. Most of the independently owned, operated donut shops here in Southern California are Cambodian run, or stem from being founded by Cambodian immigrants. Very interesting. Benefits of getting an MBA. These are tie-in to different elements in the story. Why so many Cambodians own donut shop? How to install the sink. There's a part of the story that addresses remodeling. Branding secrets from a donut princess. The reason why your donut box is pink. Learning to be a barista. Building a successful business. Finding entrepreneurs among refugees. I have about 30 videos that complement these stories very well. So again, please feel free to reach out to me, and I will send you a document with the links to make these even more engaging. And here's a picture of a donut princess in Southern California. These aren't the donuts I grew up with, but I guess they're wildly popular and somebody that's made a lot of money doing just that. So this is actually a testimonial I got from a person working in corrections. I can't say enough about this book. And this was about holding the bag, the Ethiopian taxi driver. Though it's listed as a high beginner text, I use it with a class of incarcerated men, all Spanish speakers ranging in age from early 20s to late 30s. My students were engaged by the story of Nagasi, the Ethiopian taxi driver, from the first chapter. The energy and enthusiasm in the group has been amazing. The irony is that while they can identify with the plight of the immigrant struggling to make a living and help his family back home, they also represent the criminal side of the story. Without exception, they were appalled that Nagasi would take the bag of money left in his taxi to the police. But as we come to the end of the story, I'm noticing a moral shift. Some students are starting to express the value of being honest. Pedagogically, this book is excellent. It introduces a lot of natural idiomatic vocabulary, including phrasal verbs, and keeps recycling the vocabulary in later chapters. The students tend to remember it because it's relevant and contextual. The book has a nice variety of activities that cover all 4 skills. The comprehension exercises are not terribly challenging for this class, but my focus is not so much on reading in this case as on acquiring and using the language. The students love the dialogues and can't wait to practice them with a partner, and they also feel comfortable enough to take on the female parts. They critique each other, and some days I videotape their work. Because they are role-playing, they're less inhibited about taking on gringo pronunciation, and I've seen a huge improvement in their rhythm and intonation. I was a little wary about attempting a chapter book because we have open enrollment. This is a very good point, and a lot of movement into and out of the group. But when a new student enters the class, the others have to bring him up to date on the story. So it's like joining a soap opera in the middle, and you catch on. This, of course, provides excellent speaking practice and reinforcement of the vocabulary. This letter made my day. I thought I'd share it with you. And, I so appreciate you allowing me to share it with you. And a quick word about pro-literacy. If you don't already know, believes that education is a basic human right. And these other wonderful points. I have to leave a little time for Dan at the end, but the proceeds from these material go to support really wonderful things, and we appreciate your support, and I appreciate, as an author, your consideration of these materials. So, thank you so much for your attention, and I know, Dan, are you there?
I am here.
Okay, I wanted to leave a little room for you at the end there.
I will start sharing my screen. And I wanted to come back to just a couple of slides. So remember, the ESL materials, and bear with me, I'm trying not to cough. The ESL materials at New Readers Press are available this month, the month of November, all month long, 10% off if you use this promotion code when you order, and that code is NOV20. I also want to let you know that Anne wanted me to make sure that I shared with you where to find information about the reading levels, where to find the supplemental resources, and the standards correlations. And I just put some of these links in chat, but I wanted to show you how this works. So go to our website, newreaderspress.com. And number 2, click on ESL and scroll down to supplemental and click that. When you do, you'll see a list of titles. Click on more novel scenes, for example. That's one of the ones that Anne was talking about today. And then you can read about it here, but scroll down to the bottom of the page. Oops, I went too far. And you'll see an overview of the series with a description of each title. And next to that, you'll see the NRS ESL levels. So that's available for you there. And then here are those free resources, those teacher guides that are downloadable that Anne mentioned during her presentation. So make sure you check those out too. Now, as far as the standards correlations, some of you may know about this, and if you don't, you'll want to, not just for New Readers Press materials, but for all of your materials that you're using. You can go to a website that CASAS sponsors called casas.org/QS. This is different than CASAS.org. This is CASAS.org/QS. What does QS stand for? Quick search. Now, when you go there, you'll want to click on publishers. And so publishers is right over here on the left. And when you click on publishers, you can scroll to the letter of the alphabet, scroll to N for New Readers Press, click N, and then scroll down until you get to New Readers Press, and then click it. And then you'll see a great big list of titles, and they're alphabetical, and you can scroll down. I scrolled down until I got to more novel scenes. And you can see the author's name to the right of the title. And you can just click on one of those, and as soon as you do, you will see CASAS correlations to their competencies and CASAS correlations to the content standards. We did not create these correlations. The CASAS organization created them. So there you go. And watch for an email after this webinar, probably I'd say by Monday. It's going to contain links to a recording of this webinar, a certificate of participation for you to use. If Anne will share them with me, a copy of her presentation slides and the Q&A that I received in the call. And I kept putting information into chat for people, and I didn't realize until late in the presentation that I was only sending it to the panelists and not to everyone, but I fixed it. And so thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Anne Gianola, for presenting today.
My pleasure. And also please feel free to reach out to me if you want a handout, and if you have a huge number of nouns, reach out to me. I'll send you a book.
Okay, that is all, and we will hopefully watch for the email, and you'll receive that from us by Monday. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.